Hello everyone and welcome back. Let me start by saying big thank you to everyone who supported this channel over the past 10 months. I still can't believe it, but we just reached 1000 subscribers mark. To celebrate, let's continue our legacy journey, and in episode 8, please warm welcome to the Radeon HD 6990 and GTX 590. On paper, these are the most extreme graphics cards we've ever tested. Let's jump straight into it. Looking at the AMD card first, the HD 6990 was AMD's dual GPU that released for eye-watering $699 USD. Under the surface, this monster is essentially two of HD 6970s glued together on a single PCB, much like its predecessors that we checked in episodes 2 and 4. There is 4GB of GDDR5 memory clocked at 1250 MHz that's split between the two GPU cores, clocked at 830 MHz, each effectively managing 2GB. With over 5 teraflops of compute power, this GPU, simply put, was the fastest video card ever. And just in case, AMD gave it a simple overclocking switch that delivers additional power and bumps the core clock by 50 MHz and pushing the card's TDP to 450 watts. Yours sincerely, the power supply. And just 2 weeks later, the GTX 590 comes out as Nvidia's answer to Team Red. Packing 2 GTX 580 cores under the skin, it launched for the same price of $699 USD. This card came with 3GB of GDDR5 memory clocked at 854 MHz, and to cope with thermals, a relatively low core clock speed of 608 MHz. The GTX 590 posed big danger to Team Red, especially after what we saw in the last GPU battle, but I asked the question: are we going to see a total humiliation by Nvidia, or can AMD stand its ground, or even better Team Green in this round? There's only one way to find out. Let's first inspect both cards in detail and look at what is hiding underneath. The AMD card was made by Sapphire and the GTX 590 comes from Asus, but I believe both of them are of the reference design. HD 6990 is slightly longer of the two and measures whole 12 inches or about 30 centimeters. It only just fits into my test bench, and I can imagine people who purchased this back in the day also needed a new case and a power supply. Both cards require two 8-pin power connectors, and to my surprise, the 590 is considerably heavier. Display output selection is better on the 6990, but for a casual gamer, both will suffice. Turning cards over reveals backplates on both cards, which is really nice to see. Let's crack open 6990 first, starting at the backplate, which is essentially a memory heatsink. Nice. With the two of the GPU braces and 2 screws at the I/O plate removed, the cooler comes off. There are 2 copper-based vapor chambers and thermal pads for the rest of the memory modules, and also for the PLX chip, all cooled by a central blower fan. And about that fan, well, I can appreciate nice PCB, and the 6990 is no exception. Love all those traces between the dies. I think it's only fair if we pour some isopropyl alcohol next and we get on with the cleaning. Now that's all done and nicely put together too. Now this 590 is a first card we've ever looked at that uses Torx screws. Luckily, I have a nice iFixit kit on hand and this was no problem. I start by removing 2 metal backplates that help with memory temps, 2 screws at the I/O plate, and finally 4 screws holding the shroud in place. Go easy and keep in mind there is 1 plastic retention clip just above the power connectors. Lastly, I carefully removed the LED connector and the shroud came off. This card feels hefty. Look at the middle plate and those heatsinks. They kinda remind me of the ones you see inside a Blade server, and also very similar to ones we saw in AMD card. Now this fan looks more reasonable, but we shall see soon enough. Let's clean and then apply a fresh thermal paste. Brace yourselves, here comes the ear-deafening 6990. Under a typical load, we measure nearly 73 dB and card topped at 73C, not acceptable. GTX 590 on the other hand, really impressive and nearly silent at around 60 dB and peak temperature of 77C. Finally, let's measure the raw power of these monsters. In ELPHNT benchmark, HD 6990 blows the GTX 590 out of the water. I decided to run more aggressive profile as the default, and with stock speeds, we saw 1472 points. Applying a 50 MHz overclock pushed the score to 1506. It scaled nicely when compared to results of the HD 6970. The 590 scored just 1294 points at stock speeds. I've had a lot more trouble overclocking it, and I had to settle at just 25 MHz, pushing the score to 1355. Card did not scale all that well, considering a single GTX 580 scored over 1000 points. The total power draw at the wall was 7% lower with AMD at 328 watts, despite being 13% faster. This is a win-win situation. In 3D Mark Firestrike, the tables turned. Here, the 590 leads by massive 57% over the AMD card, which simply can't utilize its cores enough. But such is Crossfire and SLI. Let's see how the two handle games next. 2013's Tomb Raider at ultra settings comes first, and using its inbuilt benchmark. At first, it looks like a very close match, but the GTX 590 and its rock-solid utilization takes it with 103 FPS on average. Metro 2033 Redux at very high settings showed no mercy. The 6990 takes the lead at 44 FPS on average, the 590 was behind by 28% at 34 FPS. I believe Metro series are better optimized for Nvidia cards, but in my testing, the utilization was peaking at only around 80% with the 590. Not entirely sure why. Next, we visit Witcher 3. And with medium settings, we see the exact opposite, where the AMD usage sits just below 80%, delivering 43 FPS on average. GTX 590 was significantly quicker in this title, at nearly 56 FPS on average, leading by 27%. Watch Dogs at high settings sees both cards utilized nicely and pushing very similar results. At around 55 FPS on average, I call it a draw. Still, 6990 achieved better 1 and 0.1% lows. I know they are very important. A classic comes next. STALKER Shadow of Chernobyl with maxed out settings kept both cards busy at around 90% usage. 6990 was slightly faster at over 386 FPS on average. GTX 590 delivered 335 FPS on average. That's what you call total overkill. FARCRY 3 was up next, and at ultra settings we saw beautiful utilization with both cards.
Enemy spotted.
AMD was only ever so slightly ahead at 74 FPS on average, and Nvidia just 4% behind. The next game tested was Dirt Rally. Running the built-in benchmark at ultra settings, results were really close. 6990 managed 49 FPS on average, beating the GTX by 8%. And of course, we must not forget about GTA 4. MSI Afterburner refused to cooperate with the 590, introducing horrendous stutters, so I had to turn the overlay off. Despite this, it's a clean sweep for the HD 6990 with 68 FPS on average. Finishing off the game testing with GTA 5. Using normal textures and very high settings, here the GTX 590 was considerably faster. At 83 FPS, it's nearly 50% quicker than the HD 6990, which was too busy fighting overlay for a change. Right, well, this was interesting to say at least. There is very little that makes me more happy than to see a fully utilized dual-core GPU. Both cards survived the testing and I'm only slightly deaf on my left ear thanks to HD 6990. After the results we saw in the last GPU battle, I was certain Nvidia was going to dominate this round. Crossfire and SLI are sadly not supported by many new titles, so loads of the games you guys suggested would not work. I still believe we captured both cards nicely. Speaking of results, the HD 6990 scored a total of 6 points and GTX 590 got 4 points, so in terms of the raw horsepower, AMD gets the crown. Woohoo! I think both cards are very close in their respective performance. Living with either of them is not something I can recommend, but if I had to choose, I'd pick the GTX 590 over losing my hearing. The 6990 is simply horrific. I can't stress this enough. This thing is loud. Both cards will be forever in my heart as something special. Looking at the second-hand market reveals they are getting if rarer. There was only one 6990 for sale at the time of recording. The 590 seems to be more common. What do you think of today's testing? Are you a proud owner of 590 or 6990? Drop a comment down below and don't forget to like the video if you do enjoy this content. Next up on the Legacy GPU battle, we are finally going to pour some fine wine. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.